On August 15th, under the glare of cameras and the scrutiny of allies, Donald Trump stepped into the negotiating room with the Russian delegation. This was supposed to be his moment of strength, the chance to prove that America could not be bent or bought. For weeks he had boasted about courage, promising to draw red lines so clear that Moscow would have no choice but to step back. Instead, the world witnessed a collapse of conviction. Trump spoke in halting tones, repeating vague phrases about dialogue and cooperation, words that sounded less like leadership and more like capitulation. Analysts immediately noted the absence of any strong defense of America's allies, any sharp warning to deter aggression, or any commitment that would reassure a restless public. What should have been a defining moment of power turned into a public display of weakness, and the reaction was swift. Commentators called it a failure, while citizens across the country asked why their president had chosen hesitation at the very hour when clarity mattered most. In cafes, workplaces, and online, the sentiment echoed. America's commander had blinked. Hashtags like #Trump failed and #negotiation disaster trended nationwide, reflecting both anger and embarrassment. Representative Jasmine Crockett, long known for her fiery critiques, emerged as the voice of that frustration. Standing before reporters, she said, "Our president promised strength and delivered surrender. That is not strategy. It is failure." Her words struck a nerve, crystallizing the growing perception that Trump's performance was not only disappointing, but dangerous. Overnight, the debate was no longer about diplomacy. It was about whether the United States had just been led into humiliation by a man unwilling to act with courage. Abroad, newspapers framed the meeting as a humiliation, noting that Trump's hesitant tone gave Moscow room to boast while leaving America's allies uncertain. At home, critics warned this was not diplomacy, but defeat. By the following morning, the political aftershocks of Donald Trump's failed performance on August 15th were impossible to ignore. Television networks replayed his remarks on a loop, and each viewing only made the weakness more glaring. Instead of drawing clear lines for Moscow, Trump had offered a muddled mix of half-sentences about cooperation and vague references to peace. To many viewers, it was not the sound of leadership, but of someone cornered and uncertain. Analysts from across the spectrum, including some traditionally friendly to Trump, admitted openly that the address lacked conviction. One retired general said bluntly, "Our adversaries did not hear deterrence, they heard doubt." That statement quickly became a soundbite repeated by outlets nationwide. Citizens across the country, scrolling through headlines on their phones, began asking themselves what it meant for America's security when even its commander-in-chief seemed hesitant. Coffee shops buzzed with frustrated conversations, while social media filled with ridicule. Memes portrayed Trump holding a white flag, while captions read, "The art of the surrender." The hashtags Chachers, Trump, the loser, and a week at the table surged to the top of trending lists, amplifying the narrative that his negotiation had not simply disappointed, but embarrassed an entire nation. Representative Jasmine Crockett, sensing the urgency of the moment, escalated her rhetoric. In a live interview, she said, "What we saw yesterday was not statesmanship, it was failure in real time. The President of the United States folded under pressure, and every American family deserves to know why." Her words resonated, spreading across talk shows, late-night monologues, and political panels. Internationally, the reaction was no softer. European newspapers printed headlines calling the meeting America's humiliation, while commentators in Eastern Europe voiced alarm, suggesting that Trump's hesitation might embolden Russian ambitions. The effect was devastating. In less than 24 hours, the narrative had hardened. By the third day after the disastrous summit, the leaks began to flow like a flood. Anonymous officials who had seen the internal notes from the August 15th meeting described a scene even more troubling than what the public had already assumed. According to their accounts, Donald Trump not only failed to press Russia on critical security issues, but actively shifted the conversation away from defense whenever it grew tense. One aide reported that when the subject of missile deployments in Eastern Europe was raised, Trump waved his hand dismissively and muttered about not wanting to escalate. To the officials in the room, it was a moment of surrender thinly disguised as pragmatism. The Russians, they said, seized on the hesitation, pushing harder with their demands while Trump nodded along without countering forcefully. For those who expected a show of strength, the image was humiliating. For allies watching closely, it was a warning sign that the American president was not prepared to defend commitments long considered non-negotiable. News outlets pounced on the leaks, splashing headlines such as "Trump sidesteps defense" and "A president afraid to push back." Retired generals went on air to express alarm, insisting that his conduct had sent exactly the wrong signal at exactly the wrong time. The mood across America turned darker as citizens realized that what had been dismissed as poor optics might actually have been a policy failure with real consequences. Representative Jasmine Crockett wasted no time sharpening the blade. In a fiery statement, she declared, "Donald Trump was not merely hesitant, he was negligent. His unwillingness to stand firm placed our allies at risk and emboldened our adversaries. This was not caution. This was collapse." The line echoed everywhere, repeated in editorials, memes, and talk shows. Hashtags like #collapse in real time and #TrumpBlink trended at the top of social platforms. The scandal was no longer just about weak language. It was about the possibility that the United States had effectively given Russia a free hand, all because its president lacked the courage to stand his ground when it mattered most. By the fourth day, the administration scrambled to defend Donald Trump's conduct, but their explanations only deepened the crisis. White House spokespeople insisted his remarks were part of a long game, claiming that restraint and patience were measures of strategy. Yet, the words rang hollow. When pressed for evidence of progress, they offered none. Reporters hammered officials with questions about concessions, missile deployments, and security guarantees. Each response sounded like an evasion, further fueling suspicion that Trump had given away more than he admitted. Editorials across the nation were ruthless. One headline screamed, "America leads from behind," while another declared, "The president who folded." Late-night hosts mocked him relentlessly, portraying him as a gambler who lost his chips at the table of global power. Meanwhile, Representative Jasmine Crockett sharpened her attack. Appearing on a primetime broadcast, she looked straight into the camera and said, "Donald Trump did not negotiate. He capitulated. He went to defend America's interests and left having defended nothing at all." The anchor tried to push back, asking whether her comments were too severe. Crockett's reply cut like glass. "Severity is what this moment demands." When a president fails at the most critical test of courage, it is not harsh to call him a failure. It is honest. Viewers at home flooded social media with praise for her candor. Hashtags like Trump capitulated and failure, in chief, trended overnight. Abroad, European leaders expressed thinly veiled concern, noting privately that the summit had shaken their confidence in America's leadership. Moscow's state media, by contrast, gloated openly, framing Trump's tone as proof that Russia had outmaneuvered Washington. The image was clear. To America's allies, Trump looked unreliable. To its adversaries, he looked weak. In less than a week, his presidency had shifted from projecting dominance to embodying defeat, and Jasmine Crockett stood ready to make sure the nation would not forget the cost of that weakness. By the fifth day after the summit, the uproar surrounding Donald Trump's performance had grown into a full-scale national crisis. Protests erupted outside the Capitol and across major cities, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "No more weakness," and "Trump failed America." Chants of "Resign now" echoed through the streets as citizens vented frustration at a president they believed had humiliated their country. The protests were not confined to one political side. Veterans, students, and workers from diverse backgrounds joined together, united by a common belief that Trump had folded when America most needed strength. News networks broadcast live footage of massive crowds, amplifying the sense that his credibility was collapsing in real time. Internationally, the criticism intensified. European leaders privately expressed alarm that America's deterrence had been shattered, while Moscow's state media gloated, airing segments mocking the president's hesitant delivery as proof of Russia's dominance. The humiliation was global, and the White House seemed powerless to reverse it. Attempts at damage control only fueled the outrage. Officials repeated the mantra of strategic patience, but few were buying it. Editorials hammered Trump as unfit for the moment, with one headline declaring, "From commander to coward." Representative Jasmine Crockett seized the opportunity to escalate her campaign. Standing before thousands of protesters, she thundered, "Donald Trump promised to be a fighter, but what he delivered was surrender. He has endangered our allies, emboldened our enemies, and shamed our nation." Her words were met with roaring applause, carried instantly across live streams and social platforms. Hashtags like "Your commander to coward" and "Trump humiliated" surged to the top of the charts. As Congress buzzed with talk of hearings, and as allies openly questioned America's reliability, it was clear the scandal had moved beyond politics. It was now a test of whether the United States could recover from the weakness displayed by its own president, and whether Donald Trump would ever regain the trust he had so carelessly squandered. By the sixth day after the failed negotiations, the scandal had grown so intense that America's allies no longer spoke in whispers. They voiced their concerns openly. In Brussels, NATO officials issued a rare public statement warning that clarity and resolve are the bedrock of security commitments. The message, though diplomatically phrased, was a clear rebuke of Donald Trump's hesitant performance on August 15th. European newspapers ran editorials asking whether the United States could still be trusted to lead. In Eastern Europe, where Russian pressure is felt most directly, leaders expressed alarm, noting that hesitation in Washington translates into vulnerability on their borders. The sense of unease abroad was mirrored at home, where Congress buzzed with talk of formal inquiries. Committees began quietly requesting documents from the State Department and the White House, seeking proof that no hidden concessions had been made. Yet the lack of transparency only deepened suspicion. Each day without answers fueled the belief that the president had offered Russia more than he admitted. Representative Jasmine Crockett capitalized on this uncertainty, emerging as the loudest voice demanding accountability. Appearing before cameras, she declared, "Donald Trump has not just failed in diplomacy, he has failed in duty. If our allies are doubting us, it is because our own president handed them reasons to doubt." Her statement spread across headlines, repeated on cable panels, and shared in millions of posts online. Hashtags like "Trump failed duty" and "Doubt in chief" surged to the top of trends. Outside the Capitol, demonstrators swelled in number, veterans joining students and families in chants of "Show us the truth." Their signs carried Crockett's words, failed in duty. For many Americans, this was no longer just a scandal about poor optics. It was about whether their president had compromised national security itself. With allies openly uneasy and Congress circling, the question shifted from whether Trump had failed to how long the nation could afford to let him remain the face of its leadership. By the seventh day, the scandal that began with Donald Trump's hesitant words had transformed into a defining crisis of his presidency. The uproar was no longer just noise from critics. It had solidified into action. Crowds camped outside the Capitol, chanting late into the night, demanding accountability. Signs reading "Trump failed" and "America deserves courage" filled the streets, carried by veterans, workers, and families who believed their president had humiliated the nation on the world stage. Inside Congress, the pressure reached a boiling point. Lawmakers from both parties admitted privately that the administration's refusal to release full records of the August 15th negotiations only deepened suspicion. Committees began drafting formal motions to compel disclosure. The narrative was no longer about poor optics. It was about whether the President of the United States had compromised national security. International allies, too, made their voices heard. European leaders spoke openly of their shaken confidence, with one foreign minister stating bluntly, "The America we saw on August 15th was not the America we rely on." Moscow, meanwhile, gloated publicly, its media outlets celebrating the summit as proof of Washington's weakness. The contrast was devastating. Friends doubting America's resolve, adversaries emboldened. Into this atmosphere stepped Representative Jasmine Crockett for her most decisive act yet. Standing on the House floor, she delivered a blistering speech. "Donald Trump has failed his duty. He has failed our allies, failed our families, and failed the very idea of American strength. We cannot trust a leader who folds under pressure." Her words, broadcast live, ricocheted through the country. Hashtags like "failed in duty" and "Crockett vs. Trump" surged to the top of trends. As the chamber erupted in debate, the image was unmistakable. A presidency defined not by victory, but by surrender. And for millions watching at home, the message was clear. This story was not ending. It was only beginning. Subscribe and stay with us, because the next chapter will decide whether America reclaims its courage or continues to stumble under the weight of failure.